The moment the lawyer closed the door behind me, I felt something shift in the air. It was heavy, thick, like a storm about to break. He didn't sit down right away. He just looked at me with that kind of nervous energy that people have when they know they're about to say something that will unravel everything you thought you knew. And when he finally did speak, it was in a voice so low, so deliberate, it was like each word had to fight its way through whatever guilt he was holding back. "Mrs. Delgado," he said, "please have a seat. What I'm about to share with you is not something I ever thought I'd say. Not to you. Not like this." My heart dropped, and my fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. That voice, I don't know how to describe it, but I could feel something inside me curling up, bracing for impact. "It's about your husband." Now, maybe you've never had someone tell you something that shakes your reality so hard it feels like your soul gets knocked off its axis. But in that moment, hearing the word husband, after 27 years of calling myself a widow, something cracked. The lawyer placed a large manila envelope on the table, sliding it slowly toward me like it might explode. I stared at it, then back at him. "He didn't die, did he?" My voice barely came out. He looked at me, not directly, but somewhere just above my shoulder, like he couldn't bear to see my reaction. "No, ma'am," he whispered. "He didn't." The silence that followed was unbearable. The ticking clock on the wall became thunder in my ears. My breath caught somewhere in my chest. My mind was trying to catch up with what he had just said, but everything inside me was resisting it. Because if that was true, if Miguel hadn't died that night, then what was I mourning all these years? What was all the pain for? I think I said his name. Maybe I whispered it. Maybe I screamed it in my mind. But everything after that became a blur of breathlessness and heat in my chest. I remember him opening the envelope. I remember the photos he laid on the table. They were in color, modern, recent. I saw a man in a baseball cap buying groceries. I saw him holding a little girl's hand, laughing, breathing, living. "These were taken within the last 18 months, the lawyer said. "That little girl is his daughter." I felt the floor pull away beneath me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the lie. It was that he let me break. He let me fall apart for almost 3 decades while he built a new life, brick by brick, moment by moment. He disappeared and made me carry his death like a second skin. Every sleepless night. Every time I walked by the closet where his clothes used to be. Every holiday dinner where I set a plate for no one. All of it was based on a lie he chose to leave behind. The lawyer kept talking, his words hitting me like cold waves, one after another. "There's more, Mrs. Delgado. The woman who signed his death certificate, she lives in your old house. The house you sold after the accident. Her name is Helena Vasquez." That name hit me like a memory I didn't want to remember. She was there that day. She brought me food. She hugged me at the memorial. She looked me in the eye and said she was sorry. That's when it really sank in. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a conspiracy, a full-blown orchestration of a fake death and a stolen life. And I'd been the ghost. I'd been the one haunting myself. I wanted to scream, to cry, but nothing came out. I just sat there staring at the photos, the documents, the addresses. All those years of silence now felt like a punishment for something I didn't even do. I gave everything to that man, my trust, my youth, my dreams. I waited for his body to show up, to be found, to give me some closure. And now I was staring at proof that he'd never even left, just changed names, changed cities, changed families. The lawyer said he had kept this information because Miguel paid him to, for years, regular payments, always in cash. He told me, the lawyer said, that if I ever told you, it would destroy more than just you, that there were people involved, that it wasn't safe. Safe for who? Him? The woman who helped him lie? The child born from the affair that replaced our life together? And that's when something in me flipped. It wasn't grief anymore. It was rage. Pure, raw, soul-deep rage. Not just because he left, but because he made me live like I was buried with him. Because I had to carry the weight of a tragedy that wasn't real. Because I lost 27 years of my life, of possibilities, of love, of peace. All for a man who never had the courage to look me in the eyes and say goodbye. I remember gripping the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The lawyer looked at me, carefully, as if afraid I'd collapse. "Mrs. Delgado, what would you like to do with this information?" That's when I looked at him. Really looked at him. "I want to find her, Helena. I want to know how she could do this to me. I want to look in her eyes and ask her how she slept at night. And then, I want to find him." It wasn't revenge I was after. It was truth. And maybe, just maybe, I could pull myself out of the grave they buried me in. But here's the part no one tells you. When your reality gets shattered like that, the pain doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. You remember things that didn't make sense back then. The phone calls he used to take outside. The passwords he wouldn't share. The nights he said he had meetings but came home smelling like cheap perfume and regret. I thought I was crazy back then. Thought I was being paranoid. But the truth is, our bodies know. Our hearts know when something is off. We just choose not to listen. Because when you love someone, you want to believe them. You want to believe the stories, the excuses. You want to hold on to the life you built, even if it's made of sand. And that's why this story matters. Because there are people out there right now, living in silence, in confusion, in grief that doesn't make sense, in marriages that feel hollow but look perfect on paper, people holding on to ghosts. And maybe you've been one of them. Maybe you still are. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever had your reality pulled out from under you by someone you trusted, I want to know. I want you to leave a comment. Just say, "I see the truth now." Or if it's too much to write, just type, "I feel this." Because sometimes, just knowing someone else gets it, that you're not alone in the pain, can be the first step toward healing. And if you're still here, still watching, it means this story means something to you. And that means the world to me. The night they told me he was gone still plays in my mind like an old tape stuck on repeat. It had been raining that evening. The kind of heavy, unforgiving storm that shakes windows and turns roads into rivers. I remember staring out the front window, watching the wipers on his car disappear into the dark, hoping he'd come home early. But he never did. Hours passed. Then came the knock on the door. 2 officers, soaked from the storm, with expressions that didn't match the words they were about to say. "We found his vehicle," one said. "It appears to have gone off the road, near the bridge on Route 18. No sign of him." Those words didn't register. Not right away. I kept waiting for the but. "But he's in the hospital. But he's unconscious. But we think he'll pull through." But none of that came. Just silence. Just empty words dangling in the air, daring me to believe them. I refused. I asked them to look again. I begged. I even drove to the site myself the next morning, standing in the mud and rain as emergency crews searched the riverbanks. They never found a body. They found the car, the driver's side door wide open, the keys still in the ignition. It looked staged. I didn't see it that way back then. Back then, I was too blinded by love and grief to consider anything more sinister. I planned a funeral without a casket, an empty box, just flowers and framed photos of a man I believed had drowned. I remember people saying things like, "At least you have closure," or "He died doing what he always did, working hard for his family." I smiled politely, but inside, I was frozen. I kept thinking, how do you mourn someone who just vanished? The truth is, you don't. You pretend. You put on black and go through the motions, but your heart stays suspended in a kind of emotional purgatory. Grief is a strange beast. It comes in waves, sure, but sometimes it also lingers like fog, never lifting, just hanging over your days. I wore his shirts to bed. I kept his voicemails saved on my phone until the carrier deleted it. I stopped listening to the radio because every song reminded me of him. I stopped going to our favorite diner. I stopped living, really. I just existed. And worst of all, I thought that was noble. I thought that meant I was honoring him. When people told me to move on, I got angry. How could they understand? They didn't love him the way I did. They didn't know the sound of his laugh when he was half asleep. They didn't know how he kissed the top of my head every morning before leaving for work, even if we had argued the night before. Moving on felt like betrayal. It felt like cheating on a memory. So I stayed in the past, for years. I sold our house a year after the funeral. I couldn't walk past the closet where his clothes used to hang without collapsing. The bed was too big, the silence too loud. I moved into a small apartment across town and tried to start over. I opened a tiny coffee shop and poured myself into work. People who came in every morning just thought I was that quiet, polite woman behind the counter who made a good latte. They didn't know I still wrote his name in my journal. They didn't know I lit a candle every year on the anniversary of his death. What no one tells you is that fake closure is worse than none at all. I tried to create meaning out of a loss that never happened. I joined a grief support group and listened to stories of cancer, car crashes, suicides. I sat there, nodding, sharing mine as if it belonged. But it didn't. Mine was fiction. I was grieving a man who wasn't dead. I didn't know that yet, of course. But my body did. My soul did. That's why the pain never settled. It didn't make sense because it wasn't real. Looking back now, I see all the signs. How fast the authorities closed the case. How calm that woman, Helena, was at the memorial. How the insurance policy stalled for almost a year, then suddenly approved. At the time, I chalked it up to bureaucracy, to coincidences. But trauma makes you look for logic in the illogical. You learn to live with unanswered questions because asking too many only deepens the ache. I kept everything. The accident report, the death certificate, the sympathy cards. I had them all in a box labeled Miguel. Sometimes I would sit on the floor with that box and pull out a single item just to remind myself it wasn't a dream, that I didn't imagine him, that our love was real. It sounds crazy, I know, but when your heart gets broken by something you can't touch or see, you crave proof that it existed, proof that you're not insane. Friends drifted away over the years. Some couldn't handle how stuck I was. Others just moved on with their own lives. I stopped attending weddings. I stopped believing in the future. When people asked if I ever considered dating again, I'd smile and say, I had my great love, and I believed that. I believed I was chosen once, and that was enough. But now I wonder, was I chosen? Or was I a placeholder until he could become someone else? There's something deeply cruel about realizing your grief was manipulated, that your pain was part of someone else's plan, that the tears you cried were, to them, necessary collateral. For 27 years, I lived as a widow. I bore that title like a badge of honor and suffering. People pitied me, respected me for my strength, but I wasn't strong. I was lost, paralyzed, and he knew that. He counted on it. He knew I wouldn't question too much. He knew I'd accept the silence as final. What makes me sick is how he let me rot in that grief while he thrived. He let me bury myself in loneliness while he raised a daughter, laughed with a new partner, built a new life. And I know this sounds bitter, and maybe it is. But can you imagine watching the man you mourned live freely like none of it mattered? Can you imagine thinking you were honoring the dead only to find out the dead just walked away? So many nights I sat by the window, imagining him at peace, hoping his spirit was near, protecting me. But now I know, those were just shadows, empty illusions. The truth was, he wasn't watching over me. He wasn't even thinking of me. He was busy being alive, being happy, while I lit candles and prayed to a ghost. That's why the lawyer's words shattered me, not just because of what they revealed, but because of what they stole. They stole the only comfort I had left, the belief that our love, though tragically cut short, had been real and sacred. But if he wasn't dead, what does that say about all of it? About me? And yet, I sit here, telling you this not for pity, but because I know I'm not alone. I know someone out there is still lighting candles for someone who doesn't deserve it. Someone out there is stuck in grief that was planted by a lie. Someone out there needs to hear this and realize it's okay to question. It's okay to ask, to look deeper, to demand truth, even if it hurts. If you've ever been left with more questions than answers, if you've lived in a space between mourning and denial, I want you to leave a comment. Write, I see through the silence, or my grief has questions. Because your pain deserves to be witnessed. Your story matters, just like mine does. I still remember the first time I saw him, Miguel Antonio Delgado. He walked into the small-town bakery where I was working at the time. wearing a white button-down shirt rolled up at the sleeves and boots that had clearly seen real labor. He smiled when he ordered his coffee. But it wasn't just polite. It was full, warm, the kind of smile that made you feel like you mattered. I was 23, still living with my mother, convinced that love was something that happened to other people. But that day, something inside me shifted. Something opened. I didn't know then that the man standing in front of me would change my entire life, and later tear it apart from the inside out. He wasn't flashy. That's the thing. Miguel wasn't the kind of man who drew attention for being loud or cocky. He was solid, quiet, a presence, the kind of man who fixed your sink and never charged you full price, who showed up on your porch with your groceries because he just happened to be in the area. People trusted him. He had that thing, respect. And in a small town like ours, where gossip ran faster than the river and reputations were everything, Miguel had gold standard status. We started dating slowly. He was traditional. He'd call me, never text. He'd pick me up at my house and open the door every single time. I remember my friends teasing me, saying I'd found one of the last good men. And I believed that. God, I believed that with all my heart. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my safe place. He made the world feel steady, predictable. And for a girl who grew up watching her mother cry herself to sleep after being left with 3 kids and no money, that kind of stability was intoxicating. He proposed after 11 months, on one knee, in front of the bakery where we met. He had a ring, simple but beautiful, and he said the words every woman wants to hear. You make me want to be a better man. I want to build a life with you, one that no storm could ever shake. And I, like a fool drenched in hope, believed him. Our wedding was small, nothing fancy, just family, friends, and a rented hall with yellow walls that we tried to cover with string lights and paper lanterns. He cried when I walked down the aisle. I remember that vividly. It's burned into my memory because at the time I thought that kind of emotion meant something. I thought it meant forever. If only I had known that people can cry and still leave you without a second thought. That tears don't always equal truth. The first years of our marriage were filled with routines that became sacred. He made coffee every morning. I packed his lunch. He'd come home smelling like metal and sweat from the small electrical repair shop he owned with a cousin. We'd eat dinner, watch old movies on the couch, talk about our dreams. He wanted a big house someday, a dog, maybe a child, though he was hesitant about that. Said he was scared he wouldn't be a good father, that his own upbringing hadn't exactly been warm. Looking back, I see the signs. I see them so clearly now that it makes my stomach turn. But back then, I didn't see a thing. Or maybe I did, and I didn't want to believe it. Because love, real love, the kind I thought we had, makes you blind. It makes you trust when you should question. It makes you stay quiet when your gut is screaming. There were late nights at the shop. At first I didn't mind. He was a business owner. It made sense. Emergencies happen. People lose power. But then came the phone calls he took outside, the text messages he'd quickly clear, the receipts I'd find in his pockets from gas stations hours away. Once, he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't own. I asked. He said it was from a client, an older woman who hugged him after he fixed her microwave. I laughed, nervously, brushing off the tight feeling in my chest. Another time, I found a business card in his truck. It wasn't from a customer. It was from a hotel. When I asked him about it, he said he'd had a meeting there. Something about a new contract. He looked me in the eyes when he said it. His voice didn't shake. That's what really messed with me. He was so good at lying, and I was so good at wanting to believe. And then there were the nights when he'd come home quiet. Not tired, quiet, withdrawn. Like he was carrying something heavy, but he wouldn't share it with me. I'd ask if he was okay, and he'd smile, kiss my forehead and say, "Just a long day, mi amor." And I'd let it go. Because I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to be understanding. I didn't want to be the nagging woman who pushes her man away. But now, I see it for what it was. He was already leaving me, piece by piece, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, maybe even physically. I just didn't know it yet. We never had children. It wasn't by choice. I tried. God knows I tried. But month after month, nothing. I remember lying awake at night, feeling broken, wondering if I was the reason he started to drift, wondering if my body's silence had pushed him into someone else's arms. I blamed myself for everything, and that's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet absence of truth that destroys you from within. He started working weekends. Said the shop was expanding. I even celebrated for him, made his favorite dinner, told him I was proud. And when I told him I was thinking about going back to school, maybe getting a degree in counseling, he smiled and said, "Do whatever makes you happy." But there was something hollow in his voice, like he was already living another life where my dreams didn't matter. Then, one day, he just didn't come home. That was the night of the storm. The night I stared out the window until my eyes burned. The night everything changed, and I thought it was a tragedy. But now I know. It wasn't an accident. It was a disappearance. It was an exit plan. And the signs had been there all along. So, to those of you watching this, maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you've seen the warning signs, but brushed them off as stress, work, life. Maybe your partner pulls away and you tell yourself it's just a phase. Or maybe you feel like you're going crazy for even wondering. Let me tell you this. You're not crazy. You're not paranoid. You're intuitive. And your heart is trying to protect you. If you've ever felt like something was off, if you've ever laid in bed next to someone who felt like a stranger, leave a comment. Write, "I felt it too," or "My heart knew." Because I promise you, sharing your truth, even in pieces, can be the beginning of taking your power back. Her name had been mentioned casually, like a footnote in a tragedy I thought I understood. Helena Vasquez. The lawyer barely paused when he said it, just long enough for the name to cut through the air and lodge itself in my memory like a splinter I couldn't remove. At first, it didn't register. It was familiar, yes, but in a vague, passing way, like a smell you recognize, but can't place. It wasn't until I saw the address on the document, the one stamped in the top corner of the death certificate, that everything inside me froze. Because I knew that house. I had lived in that house. I had built a life there with Miguel. It was the house I sold when I could no longer walk past the front door without feeling like I was suffocating in memories. And now, she lived there, Helena Vasquez. I started saying the name out loud to myself, testing it, trying to summon a face to match it. And then I saw her. Not in the flesh, not yet, but in my mind. A memory, clear as day. She was at the memorial, dressed in navy blue, hair pulled back into a tight bun, holding a Tupperware dish like she didn't know what else to do with her hands. I remember her bringing over some kind of casserole or pie. Apple, I think. Cinnamon. The scent had been so strong, it overpowered everything else in the room. She said she lived a few blocks down, that she and Miguel had spoken once or twice when he fixed her porch light. She looked me in the eyes when she offered her condolences. She hugged me. She whispered, "You were so lucky to have loved that deeply. Now I see it for what it was. Not a neighbor showing kindness, but a woman rehearsing a lie, a performance dressed in sweetness and cinnamon. And I bought it. I let her into my grief, into my pain." I thanked her, not knowing that she had signed her name beneath the biggest betrayal of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about her after that. I started driving past the old house at night, parking down the street with my lights off, just watching, just trying to understand. There were toys in the yard. A pink bicycle leaned against the fence, wind chimes on the porch, curtains I didn't recognize. Sometimes I saw a shadow in the kitchen window, moving slowly, rhythmically, washing dishes maybe, living, and I sat there outside, like a ghost in the dark, watching the life she had now, possibly the one that was meant to be mine, wondering how many lies were buried in those walls. Did she redecorate the bedroom where I cried myself to sleep for weeks after the funeral? Did she repaint the kitchen where I used to cook his favorite meals? Did she know that every corner of that house was built on a lie? I wasn't angry at her at first. Shocked, yes. Betrayed. Confused. But anger came later, like a storm front you can see coming from miles away. Slow, icy, relentless. It started with questions. When did she meet him? Before the accident? Did he move in with her immediately after he disappeared? Did she help plan it? Did she know the whole time? The death certificate was signed by her. That was what the lawyer told me. not just witnessed, signed. She had worked, briefly, as a nurse's assistant in the county coroner's office during that year. He said it like it was some sad coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after 27 years of silence. I found her online. Her social media pages were private, of course, but her profile picture was public. It was her. Same eyes, same bun. She looked older now, but not in a tired way, in a fulfilled way, like life had treated her kindly. There was a child in her arms, maybe 5 or 6, smiling wide, teeth missing in front, arms wrapped tight around her neck. The caption read, "My everything." Was that Miguel's child? I stared at that picture for hours, my hand trembling over the screen. So much of my life had been shaped by the idea of loss, of Miguel's death, of a future stolen. And here she was, building a life from the ashes of my grief, holding a child born of a man I thought was gone. The rage didn't come all at once. It built slowly, like pressure behind a dam, and I knew eventually it would break. I decided to go see her. Not to confront her, not yet, but to look her in the eye without her knowing, to feel the space between us, to see the home that once held my heart, now filled with hers. I drove there on a Sunday morning. The sun was just coming up, casting golden lines across the street. I parked far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to see, and then I saw her. She stepped onto the porch in slippers, holding a coffee mug, wearing a robe I'd never seen before. She looked peaceful, unbothered. And then a man stepped out behind her, taller than her, salt and pepper hair. His face was turned away, but I knew it was him. I didn't need to see his full profile. My soul knew, my heart knew. He handed her something, maybe a phone, maybe a kiss. I couldn't see clearly, but it didn't matter. He was alive, and with her. I wanted to scream, to run up the walkway and demand answers, but I didn't. I stayed in my car, frozen, paralyzed by the weight of the truth crashing down around me. Everything I thought I knew, every tear I cried, every night I cursed God for taking him too soon, was a lie. And the woman who hugged me at my lowest, who baked me a pie and told me I was lucky, she had been part of it the whole time. And now I need to ask you, have you ever been lied to in a way that shattered your reality? Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they were standing beside your worst betrayal? Because if you have, you know this feeling. The cold, the confusion, the urge to scream and disappear all at once. If you've ever experienced that kind of heartbreak, the one that leaves you questioning your own memories, leave a comment. Write, "I trusted the wrong one," or "My memory lied to me." Because your story deserves to be seen. Your pain deserves a voice, and you are not alone. I didn't sleep the night after seeing them on that porch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his profile, the way his hand moved gently toward her waist, the way her head tilted slightly in his direction. Familiar, intimate, like muscle memory. And every time I opened my eyes, I had to remind myself that it wasn't a dream, that the man I buried in my heart for 27 years was not only alive, but deeply woven into another life. I sat at my kitchen table until the sky turned gray with dawn, 1,000 thoughts spiraling in my mind, each one crashing into the next like a storm tide that wouldn't settle. I kept asking myself one question, over and over again. Why? Why did he do it? Why abandon me, fake his own death, disappear into another existence like I was nothing more than a chapter he'd grown tired of reading? But as the sun came up, and my coffee went cold untouched on the table, the question twisted into something uglier. How? How did he do it? How did he forge that death, create a false ending so perfect that even I, the woman who knew him better than anyone, believed it? That question became an obsession. I needed to understand the logistics. I needed to see, in black and white, the mechanisms that allowed this lie to take root. So I called the lawyer. When he answered, his voice was tight, guarded. I think he knew I wouldn't just fade away. "I want everything," I told him. "Every document, every paper you've kept hidden. I want to know everything you've known all these years." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "Come tomorrow," he said. "I'll have it ready." I arrived before his office opened. He unlocked the door and didn't speak as he let me in. The manila folder he slid across the desk this time was thicker. He didn't say a word, just stood there, watching me as I opened it. Inside were layers of betrayal, bank statements, transactions made from accounts I never knew existed, all of them under the name Miguel A. Delgado. Some under other names, aliases maybe. But the handwriting, the signature, it was his. I would have known it anywhere. Dates stamped clearly. Transfers made years after his supposed death. Deposits. Withdrawals. A consistent stream of financial activity. My heart pounded as I flipped each page. This wasn't a man running for his life. This was a man living one. Then came the photos. Not the ones I'd seen before. These were older, dated just a few years after the accident. He was standing in front of a modest building, something that looked like a hardware supply store. He had a clipboard in hand, a baseball cap pulled low, and a smile that made my throat close. Another photo, him pushing a stroller. The woman beside him wasn't Helena, not yet, just someone blurry, unknown. And then later Helena appeared. In another set, she was pregnant. And in one heartbreaking image, he held a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket, his cheek pressed against hers. They looked like a family. I couldn't stop staring at that photo. My hand trembled as I held it. This was the life he had chosen instead of me. The child he held was the one we never had. The future I prayed for, cried for, begged God for, he had just built it elsewhere. Silently, carefully, completely. There were notes too. Legal papers, a copy of the forged death certificate. It was official, stamped, signed. Her signature again, Helena Vasquez. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. A coordinated, deliberate vanishing act. Every piece of it orchestrated to ensure that I would never find him, that I would believe he was gone forever, that I would grieve, and then, hopefully, move on. But I hadn't moved on. And maybe that was the worst part, because all those years I spent in mourning, in pain, in silence, he spent building something new. I had honored a man who no longer existed, lit candles for a ghost, prayed for a soul that didn't need saving. He knew what he was doing. He knew the pain he was leaving behind, and he did it anyway. As I closed the folder, the lawyer spoke for the first time. I didn't want to be part of it, he said quietly. He came to me months before the accident, told me he needed a clean break, said he was in danger, that people were after him. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but then he brought cash, a lot of it, told me if I helped, I'd never hear from him again. I was younger, greedy. I didn't ask too many questions. Did he mention me? I asked, my voice shaking. The lawyer looked down. Not in the way you'd think. He said, you'd be better off. I think that was the moment something inside me snapped, because that lie, that arrogant, selfish lie, was the justification he gave himself to destroy my life. Better off? I'd been sleepwalking through decades of loneliness. I lost friends, family. I shut myself off because I thought I was honoring him. And all along, he was building something new, something whole, while I clung to the ruins. I stood up. My knees felt weak, but I kept my spine straight. Can I keep these? I asked, gesturing to the folder. The lawyer nodded. Do what you need to do. Just be careful. He's not the man you remember. Those words followed me all the way home. He's not the man you remember. And I knew they were true, because the man I remembered, Miguel, my Miguel, would never have done this to me, which meant that man never really existed, at least not in the way I believed. I sat in my car outside my apartment for over an hour, folder on my lap, hands clenched, eyes locked on nothing. I thought about every birthday I spent alone, every holiday where I set a plate out of habit, every time I imagined he was watching over me. And now I saw it for what it was, a performance I gave myself because I needed to believe in something. But the truth was louder now, and truth doesn't care about comfort. If you've ever found out something that shattered your understanding of the past, if someone you loved hid an entire world from you, leave a comment. Write, I know the feeling, or truth changed everything. Because your pain deserves to be acknowledged. Your heartbreak matters, and your voice is part of something bigger. I didn't plan it. I didn't sit down with a calendar and map out a date, or rehearse what I would say, or even know what I was hoping to feel. But some moments, they just call you, and you don't realize it until you're already halfway there, heart pounding, palms sweating, driving past streets you haven't dared to see in years. That morning, I found myself circling the neighborhood like I had no control over the wheel. My old house, the house that had once held my dreams, my grief, my breakdowns, stood there just like it always had. Except it wasn't mine anymore. And the woman who lived in it, she wasn't just a stranger. She was a thief of memories, of identity, of decades I would never get back. I parked across the street, not directly in front. My courage wasn't that sharp yet, but close enough that I could see her. Helena. She was in the yard, watering the plants I had once planted myself. My hands had touched that soil. I remembered the tiny hydrangea bush by the fence, how proud Miguel had been when it first bloomed. She had added more flowers, brighter colors. The fence was painted a different shade. The wind chimes were still there, but new, fresher, happier. And it hurt, in a way I can't fully describe, like walking into someone else's version of your past. She didn't see me, or maybe she did, but didn't recognize me. I had aged. Grief has a way of etching years onto your face. But I recognized every move she made, every habit that mirrored mine, the way she bent her head when she trimmed the bush, the way she walked barefoot across the lawn. It was haunting, like watching a movie where the lead actress had been recast in your own life. I stayed in the car for nearly an hour, just breathing, trying not to cry, trying not to scream. And when she finally went back inside, I didn't follow her. I drove away. But I came back, not the next day, or even that week. But eventually, the need to confront the truth became too loud to ignore. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about answers anymore. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen, about looking into the eyes of the woman who had co-authored the greatest lie of my life and saying, "I see you now." When I rang the doorbell, I half expected the world to crack open. But all I heard was the soft patter of footsteps. Then the door opened, and there she was. Helena. She looked older than I remembered, but not in a tired way. She looked full, content, like someone who had lived richly. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, nothing happened. No recognition, no flicker, just polite confusion. And then, like lightning through her face, it hit her. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. I watched her mouth open, then close, then open again. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected, steadier. She didn't answer, just stepped aside. The house smelled different, warmer, more like vanilla than cinnamon now. But the layout was the same. I didn't sit. I didn't want to feel comfortable. I stood in the entryway while she lingered by the stairs, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I know everything," I said. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She just lowered her gaze to the floor, like someone being read their own obituary. "I saw him," I continued. "I saw you, on the porch. I've seen the photos, the documents. I know what you did. I didn't—" She started, then stopped herself. "I didn't think you'd ever find out." That was the moment the rage returned. Not explosive, not theatrical. Quiet, heavy, thick like oil in my throat. 27 years, Helena, I said. I mourned him. I buried him in my soul. I lit candles. I cried over nothing but air. While you, I pointed around the house, you built this. She tried to speak. But what could she say? What apology fits inside a betrayal this big? "He told me," she said softly, "that it was the only way, that he was suffocating, that his life with you—" I raised my hand, silencing her. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare reduce my life to some dramatic excuse. You both planned this. You both left me for dead." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "But it did," I snapped. "You signed the certificate. You cooked for me. You hugged me at his memorial. And all that time, you knew." Her face crumpled, but I felt nothing. Not then. Not sympathy. Not empathy. Just an overwhelming sense of clarity. "You stole my life," I said. "Not just him. Not just our home. You stole my mourning. You stole my chance to move on." She didn't defend herself anymore, just stood there, broken and quiet. And I realized then she would carry the shame forever. But that wouldn't give me my time back. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at her for a long, long moment, then turned and left. She didn't follow. She didn't call my name. And that silence was the truest thing she'd ever given me. Back in my car, I broke. Not in the dramatic way people expect. No tears, no screams, just a hollow stillness, a deep ache in my chest that no longer pulsed with confusion, but with resolve. Because now I knew, and knowing changes everything. But let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Have you ever been lied to so deeply that your identity started to crack? That your understanding of reality began to blur? If you have, then you know this pain. It's not just heartbreak. It's something else. Something harder. Something deeper. A betrayal of your memory, your trust, your soul. Leave a comment if you've ever felt that kind of silence. The one that comes after the truth finally shows up. Type, "I lived in a lie too," or "Truth doesn't erase the pain." Because when we share these moments, we remind each other that our voices matter. That even if someone tried to erase us, we're still here. The days after I walked out of that house were like drifting through fog. Everything around me was familiar. My apartment, my coffee cup, the humming of the refrigerator late at night. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me had cracked wide open, and all the pieces I thought were buried. The memories, the hope, the rage were crawling back up to the surface. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't screaming. I was just awake. Fully, brutally awake. And I realized something terrifying. In all those years of mourning, I had never once said goodbye. Not really. Because how do you say goodbye to someone who was never gone? How do you process grief when the person you're grieving was living a parallel life with another woman, in your old house, using the same name, the same voice, the same smile he gave you? There is no book for that. No guide for what to do when your heartbreak turns into a crime scene. I began retracing every step, not of him, of me, my routine, my habits, my rituals. I started asking myself, what part of my life was built around him, even after he died? The answers were devastating. The candle I lit every Sunday at dusk, always the same scent, amber and myrrh. The photograph on my nightstand, one I never replaced, even as the colors faded and the frame chipped. The drawer I never opened because it still held his watch, a dried boutonniere from our wedding, and the letter he left me before that business trip he never returned from. That drawer, it felt like a coffin, and every time I walked past it, I mourned. But now it felt like evidence, not of love, but of manipulation, of erasure, of the way I was conditioned to disappear into the myth of him. So I opened it. The watch was still there, still ticking faintly, which felt like a cruel joke. I held it in my hands, the leather strap cracked, the face scratched, but intact. Time had passed, but part of me had stayed right here, in this drawer, in this memory. I unfolded the letter next. I hadn't read it in years. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd feel. But this time, I was reading with different eyes. His words were carefully chosen, poetic, deeply romantic. He wrote about dreams, about destiny, about how life was unpredictable, but love, our love, was eternal. If something ever happens to me, he wrote, just know I never stopped loving you. I used to read that line with tears in my eyes, clutching it like scripture. Now I saw it for what it was, a distraction, a setup, a parting gift to ensure I wouldn't ask too many questions. I burned the letter, not out of vengeance, out of necessity. Because some things need to end in ashes. That was the beginning of my unraveling, but also my rebuilding. I started going through every file I had, every receipt, every message, every legal document. I created a timeline, not of his lies, but of my truths, my reality. I needed to see, in black and white, the path I had walked while he was busy building a second life. I found an old voicemail from his mother. She had called the day after his death. Her voice trembled as she said, I know he loved you. He talked about you all the time. I remembered that call vividly. At the time, it comforted me. But now I could hear the hesitation, the pause, the way she almost sounded, unsure. So I called her. When she picked up, I didn't say my name. I didn't have to. There was silence, and then a whisper. I was wondering when this day would come. I sat down. He told you, didn't he? I asked. Yes, she said. Not right away. It took him months. I didn't agree with it. I begged him to go back. But he said he wasn't meant for that life, that it was too small, too quiet. He said he needed to disappear to finally breathe. I closed my eyes. And you never thought to tell me? She cried, quietly. Not the kind of sob that demands attention, but the kind that slips out when someone has carried shame for too long. I wanted to. I did. But he made me promise, said it was the only way. That was the final nail. Not because she had betrayed me, too, but because it confirmed what I had been resisting for weeks now. This was never about me. It wasn't personal. It wasn't about our marriage or our fights or the fact that we never had children. It was about him, his escape, his reinvention. And I had been collateral damage. That's a hard truth to swallow. To realize you weren't hated or discarded, but forgotten, passed over, rewritten. And yet somehow, that made it even worse. I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't need closure from her. I needed it from myself. So I started writing. Not for a book, not for revenge, but for clarity, for survival. I wrote down everything. Every lie, every memory, every scar. I wrote until my hands cramped, until my tears dried, until the silence in my apartment started to feel like mine again. I wrote until I remembered who I was before him, because that's what betrayal does. It strips away your reflection. You look in the mirror and see someone broken, someone less than. But that's the lie. That's the illusion. Because the truth is that surviving a lie that big takes strength most people will never understand. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from pieces someone else shattered, if you've ever stared at your own life and realized it was edited without your consent, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment that says, "I'm reclaiming my truth," or "My voice matters now," because it does. And no matter how many years were stolen from you, this next chapter is yours. I remember the first time I allowed myself to say it out loud, without crying, without shaking, without my voice cracking into pieces. He's alive. 3 words, so simple, so final. And yet, they carried the weight of nearly 3 decades of deception, isolation, and grief that wasn't real. I had spoken those words a few times before, in the lawyer's office, to Helena, even to his mother. But this time, it was different. This time, I was saying it to myself, not as a victim, not as someone begging for clarity, but as a woman reclaiming her narrative. The days that followed were both freeing and confusing. I felt like I had broken out of a cage I didn't even know I was in. But the air outside was unfamiliar. Everything I had used to define myself, widow, survivor, grieving wife, was now a lie. What was left? Who was I without that story? That pain? That identity? It's strange, the way trauma can become a part of your self-worth, the way people look at you with a softness reserved for those who've suffered, and how, over time, you begin to wear it like armor. I had become so accustomed to that sympathy, to that emotional currency, that I didn't know how to exist without it. But now, I wasn't the grieving widow. I was the woman who had been lied to. And people don't know what to do with that. I started noticing how uncomfortable the truth made others. I confided in a friend, not one of my closest, but someone I thought I could trust, and she winced, then said something like, "Maybe it's better that you never knew. Better to be lied to build my life on a foundation of ashes and illusion." I left that conversation feeling lonelier than I ever had, but I also felt something else, anger, not the kind that screams or throws things, the kind that simmers, the kind that whispers, "You deserve more than this. You deserve truth. You deserve justice." That's when the idea came to me. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to ruin him. I didn't want to show up at his house and tear his happy little fantasy apart. I didn't want to scream in front of his new wife and child. Didn't want to be the ghost that haunted the family he'd chosen over me. I wanted something else. I wanted a confession, not a legal battle, not a public spectacle. just one piece of truth, signed, sealed, undeniable, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined everything, that someone, somewhere, had the decency to admit what they did. So I wrote him a letter. I didn't write it with tears in my eyes. I wrote it with clarity, every word carefully chosen. I told him I knew, told him I had spoken to Helena, to his mother, to the lawyer, told him I had the documents, the photos, the receipts. I reminded him of the promises he made to me, the vows we exchanged, the life we had built. Then I asked for one thing, a written confession, not to punish him, not to expose him, but to give me something that would help me breathe again. I mailed it to the address I had memorized by now. No return address, just a name and a quiet plea for closure. Days passed, then a week. I started to think he wouldn't respond. And then one afternoon, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No postmark, no name, just my address, handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was short, precise. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't know how to live that life anymore. I made a choice. I will carry that guilt until the day I die. This letter is my acknowledgement. I am alive, and I left, on purpose. No apology, no explanation, just the cold truth. And yet, it was enough, because that piece of paper became the line between madness and clarity, between the past and whatever came next, between silence and the voice I was beginning to find again. I made a copy, tucked it into a folder with everything else I had collected. But the original, I kept that close. Sometimes I would unfold it just to see the handwriting, just to remind myself that I wasn't delusional, that the pain I carried for so long had a source, a name, a body, a man who had made a decision and never looked back. I started going out more after that, not to meet people, not yet, but just to be among life again. I'd go to the farmer's market, sit alone at coffee shops, walk through parks where couples held hands and children screamed with joy. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a shadow. I started noticing things, how the light hit the pavement just right around 5 o'clock, the way fresh bread smells when the bakery door swings open, the sound of jazz drifting out of a car window. And slowly, the numbness began to fade. I wasn't healed. I'm not sure I'll ever be, but I was awake, and that mattered. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at myself, not the way you look when you're checking your hair or makeup, but really looking, seeing the lines around my eyes, the way my mouth curved slightly when I was deep in thought, the softness in my shoulders that hadn't been there years ago. I didn't look like her anymore, the woman he left behind. And for the first time, I was okay with that, because this version of me, she had survived something impossible. She had dug herself out of a grave someone else put her in. She had walked through the fire and came out not untouched, but unbroken. If you've ever had to reinvent yourself after being deceived, if you've ever stared at your life and wondered what was real, what was performance, and what was love dressed up as control, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment. Let the world know you're still standing. You can write, "I am not what they left behind," or "I found myself in the ashes." Because every time one of us speaks up, we help someone else find their voice too. It's strange how a moment of truth can split your life in half, how something as thin and fragile as a piece of paper can slice through the illusion you've lived in for decades. That confession, those few lines scrawled by the man who once meant everything to me, became both the end of a chapter and the start of something I didn't yet recognize. But I was no longer paralyzed. The shock had settled. The silence had stretched long enough. Now, it was time to move. I kept thinking, almost obsessively, about his new name, Miguel Vasquez. It wasn't just a name. It was a doorway, a portal into the version of himself he'd been living behind my back, and I needed to see it. I needed to face the ghost that had haunted every year of my life. So I packed my bag, not with anger or with any dramatic plan, but with curiosity and a calm sort of rage that I could no longer contain. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was about closure. This was about reclaiming the ground beneath my feet. The address wasn't far, a few hours by car, quiet suburb, a town where no one would ask questions, the kind of place you'd go to disappear if you needed a clean break. I found the street easily, tree-lined, wide, unassuming. His house was modest, white siding, a blue door, and a wind chime swaying gently in the breeze, the same kind he once hung on our back porch. That small detail nearly broke me. It was like seeing a part of my old life stitched carelessly into his new one. I stayed in the car just like I had the first time I saw him. But this time, I didn't hide. I parked right in front of the house and waited. And then, as if the universe had heard my silent demand, he appeared. He walked toward the house slowly, his head slightly tilted down, the way he always did when he was tired. He was holding a bag of groceries in one hand, his keys in the other. And behind him, there she was, Helena, laughing at something, pushing a stroller with a little girl who looked no older than 6. And then he looked up. Our eyes met. I swear time stopped. His body went rigid. His hand dropped the keys, and for a moment he looked exactly like the man I used to know. The same confusion, the same panic, the same unbearable silence stretching between us like a wire ready to snap. Helena turned around, her expression fading from joy to concern. The girl in the stroller looked up at me, then back at her parents, unaware of the tidal wave her life was about to crash into. I didn't get out. I didn't wave. I didn't scream. I just sat there, because the silence was doing the speaking for me now. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked into the house. No words, no explanations, just turned and disappeared behind the blue door. Helena followed quickly, her hand brushing against his arm like she was anchoring him to reality. I stayed for a while longer, watching the windows, hoping, maybe foolishly, that he'd come back out, that he'd offer me something, a gesture, a glance, anything. But the curtains remained still, so I drove away. But that image, his face when he saw me, stayed with me, haunted me. He wasn't ready for the weight of the past to show up at his doorstep. He had buried me, not just metaphorically, but emotionally. He had rewritten history so completely that seeing me must have felt like a ghost stepping into daylight. But I wasn't a ghost. I was alive, fully, brutally, powerfully alive. And for the first time, I felt it in my bones. I started investigating more about him, not out of obsession, but necessity. I needed to know how deep the deception went, what he did, who he became. The man known as Miguel Vasquez ran a small gate repair business. His website was bare bones, just a phone number and a few pictures of completed jobs. It was the same line of work he used to do back when we lived together. Fixing automatic gates, installing intercom systems, small contracts with apartment buildings. That familiarity stung. He hadn't changed professions. He hadn't reinvented himself. He had simply shifted location and rewritten the cast. I found old client reviews praising his work ethic, his reliability. A man of his word, one said. The irony nearly choked me. I wondered if they'd still say that if they knew who he really was. But I wasn't going to expose him. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to be seen as the woman who chased the past. I was trying to become the woman who reclaims her future. Still, I needed one more thing. Something personal. Something real. Something that connected the man I once loved to the stranger he had become. So I visited one of the buildings listed on his website. I pretended to be a prospective client, said I was considering installing a gate system, and wanted to know if they recommended his company. The manager nodded immediately. Miguel? Oh yeah, he's great. Honest guy, real dependable. There it was again. That lie. Honest. I asked when he last worked there. He was here last week, she said. Came in with his little girl. Cute kid. Quiet. I nodded, smiled, pretended to jot something down, and then she said something that stopped my heart. His daughter. She looks just like him. Same eyes. Spitting image. And I knew. That little girl in the stroller, the one Helena had been pushing. She wasn't adopted. She wasn't a niece. She was his daughter, born long after he vanished from my life. And it hit me, harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just that he had a new life. It was that he had the life I dreamed of. The life we used to talk about. Long nights, lying in bed, imagining what our future kids would look like. He used to joke that they'd all inherit his terrible singing voice and my stubbornness. We had names picked out, stories ready to tell, a family sketched in hope. And now, he had it, without me. I went home and sat in the silence again. But this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt powerful. Because now, I knew the whole truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. And no matter how much he tried to bury me, rewrite me, replace me, he couldn't take that away. I existed. Our story existed. And now, I was finally free to write my own. If you've ever watched someone else live the life you were promised, if you've ever seen your dreams handed to someone else without explanation or apology, I want you to know this. You are still worthy. You are still whole. And you still get to create something beautiful from the wreckage. Leave a comment if this resonates with you. Type, "I'm still standing," or "My story matters too," because your words can be the hand someone else holds when their truth finally breaks through the silence. The next morning, I woke up with something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't peace. It wasn't closure. But it was direction. A sense of movement, of clarity. That single moment in front of his house, the brief look in his eyes when he saw me from the driveway, it was burned into my mind. I knew now that he hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't buried me as deeply as I feared. That split second of fear and recognition proved something essential. He still carried the weight. No matter how carefully he tried to erase the past, it had left fingerprints all over his new life. That gave me strength. I took a long shower, letting the hot water run down my back, not to wash away pain this time, but to prepare, to face whatever came next with my head held higher than I had in years. My hands didn't tremble as I made breakfast. I ate every bite. I looked out the window, and for once, I didn't imagine a version of the past where he came back. I didn't play the fantasy in my head of him knocking on my door and falling to his knees. That version of the story was dead now, and I was done breathing life into it. By the afternoon, the quietness of the apartment started pressing in. That familiar kind of loneliness, the one that used to wrap itself around me like a blanket, was now something I was actively rejecting. I didn't want comfort. I wanted truth. I wanted to feel everything, raw and real, because pretending hadn't gotten me anywhere. That's when the idea hit me. I needed to see his life one more time. Not out of obsession or punishment. I needed to witness it in full light, not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived the lie. I needed to reclaim my power in the face of the very thing that was used to silence me. So I returned. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't sneak or lurk. I parked in the same spot, stepped out of my car, and walked across the street toward his house. And this time, when I rang the bell, I didn't flinch. My body was calm, steady, like it knew this was necessary. It was her who answered. Helena. She opened the door slowly, the same guarded expression on her face as before. But this time, I saw something new in her eyes. Exhaustion, maybe guilt, maybe something heavier. "I need to speak to him," I said. No trembling, no apology. She stepped aside. He was standing at the end of the hallway, stiff and pale. He hadn't aged poorly. His body still carried that quiet strength I used to lean on. But his eyes, they were tired, hollow in a way I didn't remember. He didn't move. I took a few steps forward, not to close the distance between us emotionally. That ship had long sailed. I stepped closer because I wanted him to see me, really see me. The woman who crawled out of the life he burned down. "You owe me more than a letter," I said. Calm, low, steady. "You owe me truth. You owe me the respect of hearing it in your own voice." He looked down at the floor, then back up. His lips parted like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. Finally, after what felt like years, he gestured toward the living room. We sat, opposite ends of the couch, not close, not intimate, just two strangers with too much history and no roadmap for what came next. He started slow. He said he felt trapped back then. Said life had grown too quiet, too predictable, that he began feeling like a ghost long before he disappeared, that he had thought about talking to me, about trying to fix things, but that his own cowardice won. He confessed that Helena wasn't part of the plan at first, that it all started with one lie, then another, until it became too big to undo. And I listened. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Because I wasn't there for a show. I wasn't there to bleed in front of him again. I was there to collect the last piece of myself that had been trapped in his story. "You could have left," I said when he paused. "People leave. Marriages end. People fall out of love. But you faked your death. You let me bury you. You let me mourn you. That's not confusion. That's cruelty." He swallowed hard. "I know." I stood, not out of anger, but because I was done. And as I turned to go, he reached out, not to stop me, not to pull me back, but just to speak one last thing into the room. "I did love you," he said quietly. "It just wasn't enough." And maybe that was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I left the house without looking back. I didn't need to, because I wasn't carrying his ghost anymore. I wasn't walking in the dark. I wasn't pretending. I was stepping forward with both eyes open, fully aware of who I was and what I had survived. That night, I sat on my couch in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the aching kind, not the haunting kind. This one was clean, like an open window, like a quiet after the storm. I looked at myself in the mirror again, and I didn't see someone broken. I saw someone reborn. If you've ever stood face to face with the person who broke you and didn't crumble, if you've ever walked back into the space where your heart was shattered just to prove you could breathe there again, I want you to write it down. Leave a comment. Type, "I took my power back," or "I faced the pain and stood tall." Because every time we speak our truth, we give someone else the strength to confront theirs. And that is how we heal. Together. One truth at a time. The following weeks felt like living in two parallel worlds. One foot in the present, where I was slowly stitching myself back together, and the other still tangled in the past I'd just confronted. But the difference now was this. I wasn't drowning in it. I wasn't gasping for air every time a memory surfaced. I was learning to look at the past without letting it consume me. That, in itself, was a revolution. I started noticing little things. How my hands didn't tremble when I held the mug he used to drink from. How I didn't avoid our old wedding photos anymore. Not to grieve, but because they no longer held power over me. They were just paper, moments, proof that I had loved deeply, yes, but also proof that I had survived something few people could even imagine. Still, not everything was clean and neat. Healing isn't linear. Some days, the grief curled back up beside me like an old pet, familiar and heavy. I'd wake up from dreams where he was still mine, where we were laughing, cooking dinner, dancing barefoot in the kitchen like nothing had ever happened. And then I'd open my eyes to silence. And remember, that remembering, it hurt. But it also reminded me why I kept going. I wasn't healing just for myself anymore. I was healing for every version of me that was left behind. The girl who waited by the window for a husband who was never coming home. The woman who lit candles for a man who watched the flames from another woman's table. The version of me that cried over an empty bed while he rocked a new child to sleep in a different house. They all deserved justice. And justice, in my case, wasn't prison bars. It wasn't revenge. It was freedom. So I did something unexpected. I started writing again, not just in my journal, but publicly. I created a blog. I didn't use my real name at first. I wasn't ready for that. But I began telling my story in pieces, anonymously, carefully, protecting myself where I needed to, but still pouring truth onto the page like I had been holding it in for a lifetime. I called it The Widow Who Wasn't. The name hit a nerve. The first post got a few clicks, then a few shares, and then thousands. Women began emailing me. Messages from all over. Some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some had lost husbands for real and carried the kind of grief that never left their bones. Others had been lied to, betrayed, ghosted, left with nothing but unanswered questions and the echo of promises broken. But they all said the same thing. Thank you for speaking. And that's when I knew. My pain wasn't just mine. It was collective. It was generational. It was part of a larger story about how women carry silence on their backs, how we're expected to keep secrets that were never ours to hold, how we're praised for forgiveness and shamed for rage. I started writing more. Not just about him, but about me, about rediscovery, about choosing joy, about small victories, like the first time I laughed at something without guilt, or the first time I danced in my apartment without thinking of the last song we slow danced to together. I wrote about buying myself flowers, about learning how to cook for one without the ache of absence, about choosing a new perfume, one that didn't remind me of him, about claiming space again, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I didn't expect it to become a movement, but that's exactly what happened. Other women began sharing their stories too. Stories of betrayal, of reinvention, of survival. We started creating something that felt sacred, a sisterhood of silence breakers. Women who refused to let their pain define them, but instead let it shape them into something stronger, something braver. And with each post, with each comment, I felt less alone. Still, one comment shook me more than the others. It came late one night. No name, no email, just a message. I know who you are, and I'm sorry. I stared at it for what felt like hours. Was it him? Was it someone else who knew? Was it an apology or a warning? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the truth was, that comment didn't scare me. Not anymore. Because no matter who wrote it, no matter what it meant, it didn't change the fact that I had already reclaimed my story. I had already stepped back into the light, and no one could take that from me. If you've ever shared your pain with the world, if you've ever turned your wounds into something that helped someone else heal, I want you to know this. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. And if you're still in that quiet space, still trying to find the words, still wondering if anyone will understand, let this be your sign. You are not alone. Your story has power. Your silence is not a shame. It's just a beginning. So if you feel called to speak, even if it's just a whisper, leave a comment. Type, "I'm ready to tell my story," or "My silence ends today." Because when one woman speaks, she makes space for 10 more. And together, we rise. I think the most surprising part of healing is realizing that sometimes closure doesn't come wrapped in a perfect bow. It doesn't always look like an apology or justice served or a grand reckoning with the past. Sometimes closure is just breathing, waking up one morning and realizing that the pain doesn't dictate your every move anymore, that you're not waiting for a call, that you're not checking the door for a ghost, that you're not defining yourself by the absence of someone who chose to disappear. That's what happened to me. One morning, I opened my eyes and felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm has torn everything down, and you finally stand in the middle of the wreckage and say, "I survived." The grief didn't vanish. It never does. But it became quieter. It stopped screaming in my ear and started whispering lessons instead. It told me who I really was, beneath the ashes. I was never just a wife. I was never just someone's other half. I was always whole. I just forgot for a while. I looked around my little home and saw it differently. The coffee mug didn't remind me of him anymore. It reminded me of every cold morning I braved on my own. The worn sofa wasn't where I once curled up and cried. It was where I rebuilt myself, one breath at a time. The mirror no longer showed me a woman abandoned. It showed me a survivor, a warrior, a writer of her own story. That day, I lit a candle, not for mourning, but for gratitude. I thanked the woman I used to be, the one who waited, the one who hoped, the one who broke, because without her, I wouldn't be here, standing tall, speaking out, helping others through their darkness by being unafraid of my own. And I realized, this isn't the end. This is the beginning of a new kind of life, one where I don't chase love, I receive it, where I don't beg for truth, I demand it, where I don't sit in silence, I raise my voice. I am not just the woman who was lied to. I am the woman who woke up. And to you, yes, you, still here with me, I want to say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you for walking beside me through every painful moment of this story. Thank you for holding space for my truth. Thank you for allowing this story to breathe so that others might find air too. If you're still listening, still feeling this, still sitting with your own untold story, know that you are not broken. You are just beginning. And if this video held your heart, even for a moment, please do me this favor. Hit that like button. It helps this story reach someone else who might need it more than we'll ever know. If you're not already part of this family, subscribe, join us, because here, your story matters. Here, you are not invisible. Here, we speak what others are too afraid to say. Leave a comment if you've made it to the end. Write, "I survived the silence." Let's fill the comments with power, with proof that silence doesn't win when truth is spoken out loud. And don't go just yet. On the screen right now is another story, just as powerful, just as honest. One that might be exactly what your heart needs next. Click it, watch it. Let it remind you again that you are never alone. I'm so grateful you stayed. Until next time, take a deep breath. You're not who they left behind. You're who you've fought to become.